Welcome to the MangaLove channel. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to MangaLove so you won't miss any of the newest stories. Now, let's dive right into today's story. Chapter 1. The Spark in the Dust. Morning rain traced pale streaks down the glass doors of the old gallery, softening its reflection into something ghostly. Jeremy Vale stood just outside, one gloved hand on the cool metal handle, the other wrapped around the curved grip of his cane. He counted silently. 1, 2, 3, then stepped inside. The smell hit first. Dust, plaster, old paint, and the faint tang of metal polish. It was the kind of scent that used to mean possibility back when his body obeyed every idea that sparked in his head. Now it meant calculation. He scanned the room the way he once mapped buildings. Angles, distances, the rhythm between one breath and the next. The floor slanted slightly, scaffolding lines like cage bars along the wall. The skylights overhead, once glorious, were half clouded in grime. But Jeremy saw it differently. Under the dust, he could almost feel the heartbeat of the place. His fingertips brushed the blueprint roll in his coat pocket like a reassurance. A delivery crate sat squarely across the ramp to the lower level. A few techs were unloading it, laughing too loudly. One of them glanced up, eyes flicking to Jeremy's cane, then down again. Jeremy's jaw tightened. He turned toward the side steps instead, slower, deliberate, counting the shift in his weight. The sound of his cane striking wood echoed sharper than it should have. "Hey, careful with that ramp. Gravity's got teeth today," a voice called from somewhere near the scaffold. Jeremy's head turned sharply. A tall man in dusty overalls leaned on a beam, broad shoulders relaxed. He had a pencil tucked behind one ear, a smudge of white paint across his forearm, and eyes the color of wet stone. He wasn't smiling mockingly, just observing. "You move like a man negotiating gravity," the stranger said, voice low and amused. "Careful, precise. I respect that." Jeremy froze. He'd expected pity or awkward silence, not admiration disguised as humor. For a second, words abandoned him. "I'm not negotiating," he managed finally, "just working." "Then we're colleagues," the man said. "Warren Hall." He crossed the room, extended a hand streaked with dust. Jeremy hesitated, then shook it, steady, brief. The warmth lingered longer than it should have. The south hall yawned open like a rib cage, beams exposed, temporary lights humming. They were assessing the uneven floorboards, Jeremy for design integrity, Warren for structure. The rain outside had turned to mist, softening the edges of the daylight that filtered in through the tall windows. Warren crouched to run his palm along the warped boards. "Weight travels like breath," he said, more to himself than to Jeremy. "In through the joists, out through the walls. The trick is to make the building exhale without breaking." Jeremy's lips quirked despite himself. "You talk like a poet." "Only when the client's listening," Warren said, glancing up at him with a half smile. "Or when the floor's about to cave." The light hit his hair, turning the brown to threads of gold. Jeremy found himself looking too long before catching himself. He shifted his stance, the faint ache in his leg reminding him where he was. "I don't need help," Jeremy said when Warren's elbow twitched as if to offer balance. "I know," Warren replied evenly. "Then I'll stand near in case the building does." Something about the simplicity of it lodged in Jeremy's chest. Not a rescue, not a test, just presence. Around them, motes floated in the sunbeams like slow sparks. Jeremy exhaled carefully, steadying himself with one hand on the beam instead of his cane. He was fine. He was always fine. But Warren's words had a way of making fine sound like something less than what it could be. It happened quickly, a slip more humiliating than dangerous. The cane tips skidded on plaster dust. Instinct made Jeremy's knee lock, pain flaring sharp. He would have gone down hard if a pair of strong hands hadn't caught him at the forearm. The grip was firm, decisive, and gone as soon as he steadied. "You okay?" Warren asked quietly, not moving closer. "Yes," Jeremy said through clenched teeth. Warren nodded once, taking half a step back, giving him air again. No fuss, no lecture, just that brief anchoring steadiness that made Jeremy's throat tighten. He hated the wave of heat that followed. Not just shame, but something tangled with it. Relief. He hadn't realized how long it had been since anyone had touched him without hesitation. They resumed the walkthrough. Warren's tone never shifted, never treated the slip like a weakness. By the time they reached the far end of the hall, Jeremy's heartbeat had slowed back to normal. Almost. The break room looked like an afterthought. A metal table, old coffee maker, cracked tile. Warren poured 2 cups of bitter liquid that smelled faintly of rust and burnt beans. Fuel, he said, sliding one across. Can't promise taste. Jeremy took it anyway, grateful for something to hold. Steam ghosted between them. Warren leaned against the counter, pulled a scrap of paper toward him, and began sketching. We should move the ramp, he said, pencil moving fast. Angle it here.
Flow matters more than symmetry. Jeremy leaned closer. The lines were loose but deliberate, almost intuitive. He'd forgotten how much he missed the sound of a pencil scratching paper. Creation instead of recovery. Warren's hands fascinated him. Rough knuckles, long fingers, calluses that looked earned. Hands that built, repaired, steadied. Jeremy wondered what it would feel like to have them trace the edges of a building or a scar. He cleared his throat. That's not bad. I'll take that as high praise from an architect, Warren said lightly, folding the sketch and sliding it across. Keep it for reference. Jeremy didn't say he would probably memorize it anyway. The coffee cooled between them. Their silence wasn't awkward. It was patient, like the pause between brushstrokes. Every now and then, Warren looked up as if studying how Jeremy occupied space. Not the limp or the cane, but the deliberate grace that survived the damage. It made Jeremy's skin feel too tight, too aware. When Warren finally left, the room felt suddenly bigger, louder. Jeremy sat alone a long time, listening to the rain against the windows until it softened into evening. At home, steam fogged the bathroom mirror. Jeremy stood shirtless before it, towel around his waist, the faint ache in his legs settling into dull memory. The light gilded his reflection, skin still strong but different. The scars ran pale and uneven down his right side, reminders of what he'd survived. He traced one idly, fingertip following its crooked path as if it might spell something out. His mind betrayed him with the memory of Warren's voice. You move like a man negotiating gravity, careful and precise. Not broken, not less, just a man who'd learned new rules of balance. He hated how the thought made his chest feel warm. On the counter, he unfolded the sketch Warren had given him. The pencil lines, bold, assured, formed the new ramp plan, flowing gracefully across the page.
But it wasn't the design that caught him. It was the note scribbled at the bottom corner in small, messy script. It's still beautiful when it stands a little uneven. Jeremy stared at it until the mirror cleared. He set the sketch beside the sink like something precious, then looked back at himself. His reflection was the same, scarred, angled, alive. But the light felt different now. He didn't look fixed, he just looked standing. He looked at me like I hadn't fallen at all, Jeremy thought. And for the first time in months, that felt almost true. Chapter 2. Warmth Through Glass. The rain had been falling since morning, soft and steady, tracing lazy rivers down the window panes of Jeremy's apartment. The world outside was a blur of gray streets and umbrellas, but inside everything was hushed. The low hum of slow jazz playing somewhere near the bookshelf, the faint sense of bergamot tea, the sound of Jeremy's careful steps across the polished wood floor. He was halfway through sketching a structural diagram when a knock came at the door. He hesitated. He hadn't been expecting anyone. And then came the familiar low voice through the wood. Vale, I come bearing bribes and paperwork. When Jeremy opened the door, Warren stood there, damp from the rain, curls darkened at the ends, a rolled-up tube of blueprints under one arm and a small paper bag in the other. He looked warmer than the gray worlds behind him, like he'd carried his own sunlight. I thought I'd drop these off, Warren said, lifting the tube, and maybe offer pastries as compensation for interrupting you. Jeremy arched a brow. Pastries? Dust steals calories, Warren said seriously. Doctor's orders. My own. Jeremy shook his head, but stepped back to let him in. The familiar tug of awkwardness that usually haunted visitors didn't appear this time. Warren didn't glance at the cane, didn't scan the furniture for obstacles. He just moved easily, like he already belonged to the rhythm of the space. The apartment was warm in color. Cream linen curtains, muted blue walls, everything curated and simple. Jeremy's sketches were tacked neatly along one wall, each with exact margins. The light through the rain-painted windows turned the air silver. You live like a photograph, Warren said softly. Or like someone afraid to make a mess, Jeremy replied, setting out 2 mugs. Same thing sometimes, Warren smiled, pulling pastries from the bag. Apple, I think, or peach. I told the guy to surprise me. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, rain threading the silence between them. The sound wasn't uncomfortable. It filled the gaps, softening the edges of their voices. So, Jeremy said after a moment, gesturing at the blueprints, you found another problem? Improvement, Warren corrected. The stair rail spacing. It'll work better if we widen it slightly. Less formal, more welcoming. Jeremy nodded. You sound like you've done this a long time. I've done a lot of breaking and fixing, mostly stone and wood. Warren leaned back, voice casual but quiet. People are harder. Jeremy's gaze dropped to his tea, to the faint tremor that sometimes came when he was tired. Some people decide not to try. Warren tilted his head, eyes steady. You mean your ex? Jeremy's lips parted slightly, caught off guard. He hadn't mentioned him, not directly. What makes you say that? Your tone, Warren said simply, the kind that comes from being left mid-repair. Jeremy laughed once, sharp, brittle, before he could stop himself. He said I was taking too long to bounce back. Recovery didn't fit his schedule. His smile was thin. So, he found someone with faster legs. Warren's brow furrowed, not in pity, but in quiet disbelief. He left because he was small, not because you were broken. The words landed like something heavy and clean, cutting through the fog that had settled around Jeremy for months. He blinked once, and the sound that escaped him wasn't laughter this time. It was softer, closer to relief. I haven't heard anyone say it like that before, he murmured. Maybe you were listening to the wrong people. The rain outside deepened, a silver veil across the glass. Jeremy felt something uncoil in his chest, just a little. Later, Warren followed him into the living room, pausing to study the rows of books and framed sketches. The faint scent of turpentine and paper filled the air. Jeremy reached for an art book on the higher shelf, stretching carefully, his cane resting against the couch. His leg trembled slightly, the reach awkward. Without speaking, Warren stepped forward until he was just behind him, close enough for warmth, not contact. Closer? He asked, voice so low it could have been mistaken for the rain. Jeremy's hand froze on the spine of the book. His heart ticked, once, twice. Then, quietly, he nodded. Warren stepped closer, his chest brushing the faintest edge of Jeremy's shoulder. His arms lifted, bracketing the shelf on either side, not trapping him, but forming a frame. His breath moved against the back of Jeremy's neck, steady, unhurried. For a moment, neither moved. Jeremy could feel the heat of him, the scent of cedar oil and rain. And it wasn't pity, it was presence. His fingers found the book and drew it down, their hands almost touching. When he turned, Warren had already stepped back half a pace, leaving the air humming between them. Got it, Jeremy said, voice faintly rough. Good, Warren said, smiling slightly. No casualties. They ended up on the couch with glasses of whiskey, the air full of the low rasp of Norah Jones drifting through the speakers. The rain hadn't stopped. It only softened, a lullaby against the window. They talked about design, about beauty and ruin, about why certain things should never be restored to perfection. Jeremy spoke more than he meant to, about the gallery, about rebuilding confidence. Warren listened without interruption, only occasionally adding a line that made Jeremy's chest tighten. "You design for breath," Warren said once, tracing a finger along the rim of his glass. "Your spaces, there's always somewhere light can land." Jeremy blinked, startled by the accuracy of it. "You make it sound intentional." Maybe it always was. Something about the way he said it made Jeremy's pulse stutter. He smiled, and for the first time in months, the expression didn't feel like an effort. Warren noticed. The corners of his mouth softened, as if he'd been waiting for that small proof of life. It was late when Warren finally rose to leave. The rain had turned gentle again, whispering along the balcony. Jeremy walked him to the door, half reluctant to break the quiet they'd built between them. "You should go," Jeremy murmured, the words catching, "before the storm comes back." Warren hesitated in the doorway, close enough that Jeremy could see the small flecks of sawdust still clinging to his sleeve. His hand hovered, then reached out just enough for his fingertips to brush Jeremy's wrist. The touch was barely there, a question more than an action. Jeremy's breath hitched. The air thickened. Warren's eyes flicked to his lips, then back up. "Can I?" he began, stopping himself halfway, as though asking felt more intimate than the act itself. Jeremy didn't answer, not out loud, but his wrist turned slightly, not away, and that was enough. The kiss landed at the corner of his mouth, gentle, trembling, full of hesitation and pulse. Warren's lips were warm, tasting faintly of whiskey and rain. It wasn't the kind of kiss that demanded. It offered, asked, waited. Jeremy's fingers curled around the edge of the doorframe to stay upright. He wanted to step closer, to let it deepen, but something inside him trembled. Too many ghosts in the room, too many memories of being rushed, handled, pitied. He broke the kiss first, breath shaky. "I'm not ready," he whispered, voice half apology. Warren's eyes softened. "Then tonight we stop." He stepped back first, slow, deliberate, giving the moment room to breathe. "Good night, Jeremy." Jeremy nodded, unable to find words. The door closed quietly behind him, leaving the echo of that kiss like a heartbeat against his skin. Rain pressed gentle fingers against the windows long after Warren was gone. Jeremy sat on the couch again, the empty glass on the table beside him, his hand unconsciously rising to his lips. He could still feel the warmth there, could still smell the faint trace of rain on Warren's clothes. The jazz had faded to silence. Only the sound of rain remained, ticking against the glass, steady like quiet applause. Across the city, Warren walked under his umbrella, collar damp, smile ghosting across his mouth. He resisted the urge to text, to break the silence too soon. Some things, he thought, needed stillness to grow. The rain kept falling, silver and endless, and both of them, each alone in their own rooms, felt the strange, tentative heat of something beginning. Chapter 3. The Edge of Want. The workshop smelled of cedar oil, varnish, and dust, the kind of scent that belonged to hands, not machines. Half the room was swallowed by soft shadow, and the other half was lit by a single window where light slanted through like liquid amber. Sculptures rested under muslin cloths, their shapes half revealed, bodies paused mid-breath. Jeremy stood at the threshold, leaning on his cane, absorbing it all. The air was thick with quiet breath, textured and warm. He moved slowly, not from pain, but from awareness of the uneven floorboards, of the fact that he was stepping into a space that felt deeply personal. Warren had already cleared a path for him, unceremonious and efficient. Cables gathered, tools pushed aside, stool adjusted. "Watch the corner," Warren said, without looking up, his voice soft but grounding. He was tightening a clamp over a piece of half-carved marble. His sleeves were rolled, forearms streaked with chalk dust. The muscles in his forearms flexed as he adjusted the grip. Jeremy watched the movement, fascinated. There was precision in it, but not stiffness. The kind of grace that came from knowing the limits of a thing and loving it anyway. "This place is," Jeremy began, words catching. "A mess," Warren finished, glancing over his shoulder with a grin. "Alive," Jeremy corrected, smiling despite himself. That earned him a small, quiet look, one that lingered for a beat too long before Warren turned back to his work. "Then it's doing its job."
Warren's chisel moved with rhythm, like breath. "It's about pressure," he said, demonstrating the blade kissing the marble with small, certain taps, not force. "You breathe with it, not against it." He handed the chisel to Jeremy, the gesture natural, not ceremonial. Jeremy hesitated. His hand had always been steady once, but years of disuse made him cautious now. "Try," Warren murmured. "If your leg gets tired, we sit. You lead, I follow." Jeremy blinked at the phrasing. It wasn't the usual reassurance. No pity, just trust. He set the chisel's edge against the marble. His hand trembled once, then steadied. The sound was rough, uneven, but real. "Good," Warren said, stepping behind him, not crowding, just close enough for guidance. His hands hovered near Jeremy's. His breath, a quiet echo near his ear. "Here, let me show you something." Jeremy felt his pulse kick. Warren's fingers brushed over his knuckles, aligning them slow and deliberate. "Don't fight it," Warren whispered. "Let it move with you." The words were meant for the marble, but they landed deeper. Jeremy felt the warmth of Warren's chest a fraction away from his back. His own breath faltering as he moved the chisel again, slowly, measuring the rhythm shared between them. The scrape of steel on stone filled the air like a heartbeat.
Jeremy found himself breathing in sync with Warren without realizing it. When he glanced over his shoulder, Warren's gaze was already there, soft and intent. For a moment, everything else, the scars, the stiffness, the ache, fell silent. Jeremy laughed suddenly when the chisel slipped, leaving a crooked groove in the marble. "Guess that's one for the reject pile." Warren looked down at the flaw, then back at him. "No," he said softly. "It's honest." The sound of Jeremy's laugh lingered, low and genuine, and something in Warren's chest pulled tight. He'd heard that kind of laughter before, rare, unguarded, belonging to someone who'd forgotten he could still sound alive, and before he could stop himself, he reached out. Jeremy turned just as Warren's hand found the edge of the table beside him, and their faces were close, too close. "Warren," Jeremy said, but it came out like an exhale, not a warning. Warren's gaze dropped to his mouth, then flicked up again, searching. "Tell me to stop," he murmured. Jeremy didn't. The first kiss was rougher than either expected. Teeth, breath, the catch of a shirt button between them. Jeremy's hand found Warren's shoulder, anchoring himself as their lips met again, deeper this time. All hesitation burned away. Warren's palm slid to Jeremy's chest, feeling the quick hammer of his heartbeat. He whispered something, maybe praise, maybe just his name. The world narrowed to heat and the faint taste of dust in the air. Then Jeremy stiffened. The muscle in his thigh clenched hard, a cramp, sharp and sudden. He gasped, pulling back, bracing on the table. Warren's eyes widened. "Easy," he said, voice steady but breathless. He dropped to one knee, immediately, hands hovering but not touching. "Can I?" Jeremy nodded, short and embarrassed. Warren's fingers pressed through the fabric, slow and careful, rubbing the muscle in steady circles. His gaze stayed on Jeremy's face, not his leg, checking for discomfort. The touch wasn't sensual. It was kind, grounding. The heat that lingered between them didn't vanish. It changed shape, softened into something that made Jeremy's throat ache. "Better?" Warren asked quietly. Jeremy nodded again. They stayed like that for a moment. Warren kneeling, Jeremy perched on the edge of the table, their breaths sinking again in the quiet. When Warren finally stood, he looked torn between apology and restraint. "We can want," he said softly, "and still wait." Jeremy's chest rose and fell once, hard. "I know." Their gazes held a long beat, unspoken promise, unspent heat. And then both stepped back, the space between them filled with air again, trembling and clean. Later, while Jeremy drank water and tried to laugh off the tension, Warren began rearranging tools at the far wall. The room still hummed with everything they hadn't said. "Sit here," Warren called after a moment. He'd pulled over a stool and started patting the seat with a folded cloth, adjusting the height so it met Jeremy's line of sight with the workbench. "You shouldn't have to stand the whole time." Jeremy raised an eyebrow. "That's unnecessary." "Not unnecessary," Warren said. "Smart." Jeremy hesitated, then sat. The stool was stable, perfectly balanced to his reach. When he looked up, Warren wasn't watching to see if he approved. He was just cleaning tools. No show of concern, no coddling, just thoughtfulness disguised as practicality. Jeremy realized, not for the first time, that Warren's quiet was its own kind of affection. "Thank you," he said finally. Warren just nodded. "You can return the favor by not dying on me next time you pick up a chisel." You are listening to a narrated story on the MangaLove channel. Don't forget to share your thoughts about today's story. Jeremy laughed, the sound low. "I'll try my best." The moment fractured when Warren's phone buzzed on the worktop. He frowned, wiped his hands again, and answered. "Yeah, you're kidding? That soon?" His tone shifted from relaxed to alert. "Right, we'll make it happen." He hung up and exhaled through his nose, looking at Jeremy. "The gallery manager, they've moved the opening up 2 weeks. Apparently some donor wants to preview early." Jeremy's eyebrows rose. "That's ambitious." "Reckless," Warren said. Then his expression softened. "Means more time together, though. I'll need you around to keep me from throwing a hammer at someone." Jeremy smiled faintly. "I'll add that to my consulting fee." The tension that had crept in melted again under their banter. Yet beneath it, the awareness remained of time shortening, of proximity tightening, of something between them that couldn't stay dormant for long. By evening, the sky had turned violet gray, clouds split with thin streaks of light. Warren offered Jeremy a ride home before the rain started again, and Jeremy didn't argue. The truck smelled faintly of sawdust and old coffee. The windows were cracked open, letting in the cool air that smelled like rain about to happen. They drove mostly in silence, but it wasn't the kind that hurt. Every few minutes, Warren's hand hovered near the gearshift, just close enough that Jeremy could feel its warmth without contact. The silence between them throbbed like the pause before music begins. When they pulled up in front of Jeremy's building, the street lamps had just blinked on, painting the wet pavement gold. Jeremy turned toward him, half in shadow. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for today." Warren met his gaze, something unreadable flickering behind his palm. "You did good work." "That's not what I meant," Jeremy said, voice low. Warren's breath caught, barely audible. Jeremy's fingers brushed the edge of the console, close but not touching. "Dinner at mine," he said. "Tomorrow, I can cook." Warren's smile was small, but sure. "Then I'll bring dessert." Jeremy opened the door before his heart could trip over itself. "Good," he murmured. "I like sweet things." Warren watched him disappear into the building before starting the engine again. The rain began just as he pulled away, streaking the windshield with golden gray. In the rearview mirror, the apartment lights flickered on, soft, steady, like embers refusing to die out. Chapter 4: The Night of Hands. The knife's rhythm set the room's pace, steady, even, unhurried. Jeremy's fingers curled into a neat claw as he chopped herbs on the grain-dark cutting board, filling the kitchen with the clean, green cut of basil and the brighter, citrusy snap of parsley. Steam hummed from a pot on the stove. Soft jazz threaded the air like a low, forgiving tide. The apartment, cream curtains pulled close against a drizzle, warm bulbs dimmed to amber, felt smaller in the nicest way, as if it had gathered itself to hold what the evening might become. Warren leaned a hip against the counter with a wooden spoon, watching. "You're going to scorch the garlic," he murmured, in a voice meant for the space between two people who could already hear each other's breaths. "I have never scorched garlic," Jeremy said primly, tossing a pinch of salt into the pan. The oil swayed, releasing a deep, sweet perfume. "Not once." "Tragic," Warren said, a man undone by his pride. Jeremy flicked water toward him with the tips of his fingers. It speckled Warren's forearm, and he made an exaggerated, affronted noise. The spoon clacked gently against the pot. Jeremy's laugh, quick, bright, surprised out of him, rang against tile and glass and made Warren close his eyes for a heartbeat to feel the shape of it. They shared a single glass of wine, passing it back and forth like a secret. When their fingers brushed, Jeremy pulled back on reflex, then pushed forward again, deliberately reclaiming the moment. Warren took the cue without commentary. He didn't crowd, didn't announce his gentleness like an apology.
He simply existed inside Jeremy's periphery until it felt natural to keep him there.
Steam plumbed up and fogged the underside of the cabinet. Jeremy lifted the lid and stirred. The sauce caught the light in a slow roll. Warren stepped closer, not touching, and then, with 2 fingertips, touched Jeremy's temple, pushing back a half-fallen strand of dark hair. He paused with that touch suspended, the question obvious in the pause, not the words. Jeremy leaned into it, cheek turning by a fraction that made everything plain. Permission wasn't a speech tonight. It was a weight shift, an angle, a breath. They ate at the edge of the counter with the kind of hunger born from a day of keeping themselves busy. Warren said something low and wicked about the pasta being only a vehicle for Jeremy's ego, and got a second flick of water for his trouble. Jeremy said, "You make a mess of flour look like sculpture," and felt heat climb his neck when Warren's smile went small in private. After, Warren reached for the sponge, and Jeremy smacked his hand lightly away. "Guest," he said. "Co-conspirator," Warren countered, but he let Jeremy win. He stood next to him, drying dishes, shoulder brushing shoulder as the sink hissed and the radio crooned. The repetition of movement calmed the air. Rinse, shake, pass, cloth, shelf, return. Jeremy filed the spoons with the same quiet care he gave to drawings, and noticed how everything he'd set in the kitchen had started to look less like a photograph and more like a place a person lived. Steam blurred the edges of the room again when he boiled water for tea. The glass of wine ended up between them once more. His turn, then Warren's, the rim coming back warm, the taste deepening with someone else's mouth on it. The part of Jeremy that counted paces and predicted stares acknowledged that he had planned this slow procession of small yeses, and the part that had been afraid of wanting more simply wanted.
The almost kiss happened over the pot by accident, and also because there was no other way the night could have walked toward itself. Jeremy set a lid at an angle and turned too quickly. Warren was already there in the small space left. They didn't collide. They drew up short together, breath to breath. Warren's fingers found Jeremy's hair again, more deliberately this time, and pushed back that same disobedient strand. He looked down once at Jeremy's mouth, then up, asking in the quiet. Jeremy tipped forward the barest degree. The answer landed like a thread catching light. They didn't kiss then. The lid clinked into place, and both of them were a little unsteady on their feet. Dinner was finished. Plates were rinsed and forgotten. The evening changed temperature. Jeremy reached for the tea and missed, his hands stopping at the counter instead. He didn't intend to pull Warren in. He simply found the space between them and stepped into it. They met with a soft sound and a soft shock. Not the first crash of a storm, but the first steady rain. The kiss against the counter had heat in it already. It wasn't feral. It was hungry in the way a body gets when it's finally safe enough to admit it needs. Warren's mouth learned Jeremy's timing quickly, the pause before his lips parted, the slight catch of his breath when a hand skimmed too close to a place that had been ignored for fear of pity. He chased and yielded in alternating measures. Praise murmured between breaths. "You taste like good trouble. You're warm everywhere. You can say no and make me grateful for it." Warren broke first, but only to put words between them. His voice came out low, scraped raw, in the most careful way. "Tell me what's okay." The response rose from somewhere truer than habit. "Stay with me," Jeremy said, and it sounded like a vow to both of them. Don't worry about perfect. Warren's eyes went soft enough to undo the backbone of him. He touched Jeremy's jaw with his knuckles instead of his palm, less hold, more note taken, and whispered, "Okay." They made their way to the couch by inches, a hand skimming down a rib and pausing at the tremor to ask without speaking, the pivot of weight to accommodate the leg that still misfired under stress, the half laugh when they bumped knees, and the immediate unembarrassed apology that followed. Jeremy sat first, then eased back until lamplight made his profile into something carved and cherished. The radio left the room to its breathing, and the windows went on catching rain. What followed belonged to the language the night had promised. Warren touched like a man learning a favorite song by ear,
The tender pause to find the note, the hum to keep time, the patience to repeat until it sounded right under his hand. His palms mapped Jeremy's sternum and flank, the abraded edge of an old scar, the tender place where breath grabbed before it smoothed into warmth. He treated each place like a discovery that made sense of the whole. Jeremy let himself be touched in full without folding down smaller to make it easier for someone else. When his breath stuttered, he didn't excuse it. He felt the press of Warren's lips along the pale seam at his side, softened, lightening, and the ache that had lived there so long did a quiet, stunned thing. It receded. He felt the bow of Warren's mouth at the edge, where skin changed texture near the inside of his arm, and the warmth pulled in a slow rush that said, "Mine," in a voice that was finally gentle. "You're beautiful when you exhale," Warren said at one point, as if the air itself were the thing he was praising. Jeremy almost laughed from the relief of it. He returned touch for touch, gaining fluency quickly. Jeremy had always been precise with his hands. Tonight, he was generous, letting curiosity guide him the way design used to. He learned the notch of Warren's shoulder that undid him, the 3 places a thumb pressed would pull a sound into the room, the angle of jaw that asked for patience before it asked for more. He tasted skin and found out that Warren tasted like cedar and winter apple and something warmed by his own body heat. He learned to follow the shift of breath the way he followed the shift of a sketch. If it caught, you changed the line. Heat built the way weather does, unquestionably there, then closer, then everywhere. They did not name what their hands did. The night didn't ask for labels. It asked only for reverence and accuracy. Jeremy gave both. Warren answered in kind. The rhythm they found together felt like a loop of rain on the roof, growing, cresting, settling with a sigh that loosened the tightest parts of the house. After, they laughed, a messy, quiet, perfect sound, because someone's elbow had gone numb, and someone else's foot had fallen asleep, and because it felt new to laugh at the end, not an apology at the beginning. They lay close without needing to tangle, heat uncoiling into something easier to hold. Warren disappeared for a minute and came back with a bowl of warm water and a soft cloth. He worked in silence, the kind people use when they want to be careful. He didn't fuss, he just made the cloth warm again when it cooled and pressed a kiss into Jeremy's shoulder between small, gentle touches. When Jeremy reached for the cane, leaning against the coffee table to shift it closer, Warren got there first and placed it within easy reach instead of out of sight. The gesture landed louder than any praise. "What?" Warren asked when he saw the look on Jeremy's face. "Thank you," Jeremy said, "for not tidying me away." Warren sat back on his heels for a breath, then got up and wandered to the bedroom, returning with one of his own shirts, gray, soft, stretched at the collar. "Wear this," he said, and the note in his voice made it sound like a necklace or a spell. Jeremy pulled it on. It fit as if Warren had stood too close to him once, and the shirt had remembered. It smelled like sawdust and soap, and he felt undone by how much he wanted to keep it. He tried to make a joke and failed. The truth came out instead. "I'm afraid," he said, "that I'm too much work." Warren stood at the window and looked at the rain while he answered, as if searching for the exact words the glass would allow. When he spoke, he didn't turn around. Maybe he knew that sometimes the truest things were easier to say to a reflection. "Your work I want," he said simply. "The kind that's done with hands and patience and doesn't end because the point isn't to finish, it's to live inside it." Jeremy pressed his knuckles to his mouth. The ache that had sat under his ribs for months did that stunned, quiet thing again. He didn't ask if Warren meant forever. The word that mattered had already arrived. Want. "I'll make tea," Warren added, softer, and the ordinary future of it made the room steadier than any promise could have. The kettle sang, cups clinked. Warren brought honey to the table because he'd noticed earlier that Jeremy kept it tucked behind the sugar, barely used. They drank slowly, fingers brushing the warm porcelain. It felt like the sky had come lower and wrapped itself around the building while the lights hummed. When they settled again, it was back on the couch. The radio had turned to a track with a slow drum, like a human heart, and the rain thickened to match it. Warren draped a blanket over both their knees and adjusted the cushions by inches until Jeremy made a small, unconscious sound of satisfaction he would have denied in any other life. Warren leaned his head back and closed his eyes. Jeremy watched his throat bob once, the tendon there shifting under his skin. He angled closer. The quiet was not empty. It was full of the fact that someone had taken a long look at him and chosen to stay. Warren's hand found Jeremy's without ceremony, and their fingers slipped together in a grip that wasn't intertwined so much as placed, firm, familiar, a promise to hold again later. Outside, the rain steadied into the heartbeat it had been threatening all night, constant, assured. Their silhouettes on the couch, the broad shape of Warren, the long lines of Jeremy, still pulled elegant by habit, merged and separated with their breathing. The lamplight threw their shadows onto the curtain, a moving sketch of two men who had figured out how to keep the room small enough to hear each other. Jeremy let his eyes shut. His last clear thought before sleep slid the floor out from under him was not about the kiss or the heat or the way Warren said, "want." It was about Warren's hands tracing the pale edges of scars like they were borders on a beloved map, important only because they told the truth about where a person had been. He understood it cleanly, without fanfare. Warren hadn't come to fix what was broken. He had come to worship what had survived. The line in his mind settled quietly, as if written in warm water. He didn't flinch when he touched what others avoided. Chapter 5. Morning Light Doesn't Lie. Dawn slipped through the curtains like something soft that had been waiting for permission to enter. It brushed the sheets, gilding the edge of a shoulder, the curl of a wrist. Jeremy woke slowly, surfacing from the kind of sleep that forgets itself, aware first of warmth and then of a thumb tracing idle circles over the inside of his wrist, the one lined by the faint, pale scar. "Still here," he murmured, voice caught between disbelief and the smile that almost followed. "Nowhere else," Warren answered, quiet enough that the air barely moved around the words. He kept drawing those small, patient circles, like a craftsman, reminding himself that his favorite work was alive and breathing. Jeremy turned his hand, lacing their fingers, and they stayed like that, letting the light gather until it felt like morning had found them on purpose. By midday, the city had a pulse again. The restored gallery thrummed with footsteps, the varnished floors catching reflections of people and flashbulbs and champagne flutes. Jeremy stood near one of the new installations, the glass structure he'd fought for, a geometry of light and patience, and felt none of the tremor that used to live in his chest. Warren was a few paces away, fielding questions from the crew, his shirt rolled up to the elbows. He looked over once, just enough to check that Jeremy was steady. Jeremy gave a small nod back. It wasn't about dependence anymore. It was about witness. The hum of conversation bent suddenly, then parted like cloth. His ex, all crisp lines and expensive cologne, was there. A smirk curved over familiar lips. "You're still limping," he said, the kind of barb that expected old wounds to reopen. Jeremy's cane tapped once against the polished wood. "I'm still standing," he replied, tone calm, eyes level. The man blinked, wrong-footed by grace where he'd hoped for anger. Jeremy turned away, the sound of his step and cane together, a deliberate rhythm that didn't need to apologize for itself. At the center of the gallery, a lighting rig jammed. The crowd shifted, murmuring. Technicians scrambled. Warren was already climbing halfway up a portable ladder, calling out, "Jeremy, you designed the spacing. What do you want to do?" Without thinking, Jeremy crossed the floor, his limp measured but sure. He assessed the angle, the tension in the cables, the way light spilled unevenly across the exhibit. Then he gave calm instructions. "Shift 2 degrees. Loosen the second hinge. Balance the beam on the line of shadow instead of chasing brightness." The correction was elegant and immediate. The installation snapped into symmetry. Applause rose, polite but genuine. Warren grinned down from the ladder, pride open and bright. Jeremy just smiled up, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve, pretending not to notice the tremor that wasn't there anymore.
Twilight found them on the rooftop, the gallery quiet now, except for the distant echo of the city. The sky was that indeterminate color between lilac and smoke, and the wind smelled faintly of rain and iron. They sat on the low wall, shoulders nearly touching, watching the day fade. "I used to think I was half a man," Jeremy said after a long stretch of silence. "Everything after the accident felt reduced, like I was the echo of myself." Warren turned toward him, elbows on his knees. "No," he said softly. "You were waiting for someone who saw the whole." He said it like a truth, not a compliment. Jeremy blinked hard, throat working. But before he could answer, Warren leaned forward and pressed a kiss to his forehead. It wasn't heat, it was reverence. It felt like the first blessing that didn't require forgiveness. That night, home felt like a new country. The lamplight was gold and low, the air still tasting of paint and champagne. Jeremy set his cane against the wall, close, visible, unhidden. Warren stood a few steps away, watching him the way he always did, steady. "Offering?" he asked, and the question held more tenderness than any declaration could. Jeremy nodded. "Here." Warren moved in increments, a choreography of small permissions. "This pace," he whispered against Jeremy's jaw. "Yes, tell me if the leg needs rest." "Then you'll have to stop kissing me like that," Jeremy murmured, laughter catching on the edge of the words. They stumbled toward the bed, bumping a knee against the frame and dissolving into soft laughter that stripped the moment of every ghost it could have held. Jeremy reached first, guiding Warren down beside him. There was no urgency, only the surety of belonging. Light through gauze, breath through quiet. Everything unfolded with the rhythm of tide against shore. Warren's hand traced the map of Jeremy's body, the way an artist learns the grain of wood, not to alter it, but to follow where it naturally led. Jeremy opened where he had once braced, learned that surrender could be a form of strength. They moved together the way music remembers itself, beginning, pause, return. The windows brightened with a sudden gust of rain that softened into stillness, as if even the weather had decided to listen. When the final shiver of motion faded, the world didn't break apart, it balanced. Jeremy felt Warren's breath against his throat, the pulse of two heartbeats learning the same pace. His body, long mistranslated as damage, felt fluent again. The room cooled slowly, the lamplight paling. Jeremy lay half on his side, tracing the outline of Warren's shoulder blade. The cane stood by the bed like a quiet witness, neither forgotten nor needed. Warren's voice, drowsy, came from somewhere near his chest. "We should take a trip," he murmured, "somewhere by the sea. Watch storms from safety. Let the noise happen without us for once." Jeremy smiled against his skin. "You'll get restless after a day, maybe, but I'll still want to be there with you." The hum in the air felt like the breath before a vow. Warren lifted his head, eyes half closed, and said it plainly. "I won't fix you. I'll choose you." Jeremy's answer came without hesitation. "Then I'll let myself be chosen." It wasn't dramatic, it was certain. The words fit the room like the right temperature. They lay like that until the city quieted, until the air between them grew thick with the promise of sleep and something sturdier than hope. Morning arrived not with noise, but with brightness, the kind that forgives. Jeremy woke to the sound of gulls from the river, to the smell of coffee someone else had started. He found Warren on the terrace, barefoot, holding 2 mugs, his hair damp from the shower and curling at the ends. Jeremy stepped out to join him, barefoot too, no cane. He leaned lightly against the rail, feeling the sun hit his skin. Warren set a mug in his hand and wrapped an arm around his waist from behind, chin resting on his shoulder. Below them, the city was already alive. Above them, the sky was that unrepeatable color of first light after rain. The world looked freshly built. Jeremy exhaled slowly, steadily. The air was clear in his lungs, his legs steady under him. Healing, he realized, wasn't a finish line or a reclaimed version of who he used to be. It was standing here, warm and wanted, unhidden in the open day. Healing isn't returning to who I was, he thought,
watching the horizon bloom gold. It's learning that who I am is already worthy of love. He leaned back into Warren's hold, and the morning kept its promise. Thank you for listening to MangaLove Storytelling. If you find the story meaningful and enjoyable, please remember to give MangaLove a like and subscribe so you won't miss the newest stories. Wishing you a wonderful day.